Now we're being live streamed.
Woo-hoo.
I just want to get the link because it's much easier to find now than it is to find later. Put that over here.
Woo-hoo.
Oh, I just want to get the. Oh, shoot. Jeez. I hit the wrong button. No thanks. Mute. That's what I needed. This is what happens when Dawn is not here to take care of us. Okay. Now then, start webinar. There we go. And people will be joining. Here we go. Here they come. Hello, hello, hello.
Welcome to Live at the Loom.
Without any looms, except for Carly's. Carly's got, two. Carly has 2 looms.
2 looms.
And a spinning wheel. 3 looms.
4. I have 4. Actually. Dang.
Carly is in her loom room. I am not. Not this week, but doing loom adjacent things. And Tien is here to moderate for us because Carly and I will be pointing our eyes in other directions besides where your questions are coming up. So Tien will be keeping an eye on the conversation and making sure that we don't miss anything that are questions that we can answer, being the liaison between you guys and us guys. And also, I hope available for color consultations because I've got color choices to make and I'm sure Carly will too.
Yep.
So we are starting out the stash weave along by going through our stash or a subset of our stash. Carly has a little mini stash in a jar. And I have
It's a candy jar.
It is.
I have a pile on my table, which I will come back to in a minute. But for the moment, we're going to start out by kind of sorting through stuff and making some decisions. So Carly is going to explain what she's going to be working on the table you can see there behind, and then I'll point my webcam at my pile, and we can sort of group think our way through what I'm doing with my big pile. So Carly, take it away.
Okay, so I'm gonna be doing my project on just my little samplet here. And where I'm coming from is that I think if you're a dedicated rigid huddle weaver, we tend to do a lot of stash projects as it is. So we don't have this, we have a different set of challenges than deciding how you're going to set up a draft and pre-design and do, make your warp and all that stuff. We typically, at least I do, grab what I like, put it on the loom, design it on the loom, design the weft as I weave, which is awesome and really fun. A lot of it, a lot of reason why we end up with this loom is because we like that process of just getting your fingers in it and doing it. So I have this is my jar that I just put odds and ends. Like as I weave and I finish a project, if there's anything left over, it just gets thrown into the little jar. When the jar gets full, it's time for me to do a stash project. So last time I did a stash project, I actually just did I think it was like 4 yards of just whatever. It's very what is it, that Japanese style, which I'm spacing out on, where you weave intuitively is a
Oh, Sayori.
Sayori style, and I ended up making a coat with it and it was really pretty and I actually ended up selling it. But this one I was like, I want to do something a little bit more like predetermined. And I want to challenge myself to actually try to come up with some sort of a basis of a design that will be a little bit more cohesive. So when Jen and I were talking about what to do, like if we should do plain weave or not plain weave, I decided that I really wanted to do something like this. This is from Erica de Reuter's Weaving with 3 Shafts. And this is kind of why I focus so much on drafts in the academy classes, is because if you read the drafts and you know how to translate these threadings, then this is just a language that you could read and you could put on your loom. So what I am going to do is I'm going to start with a background of a solid color, weave it on 2 heddles. This is almost like a huck with floats. So I could actually do this with pickup sticks if I wanted. But the threading is going to go every other threading. It's like pick by pick. It's going to be a stash stripe and then my background color, my stash stripe, my background color. And then I can change them and add different textures and things like that. So that's my basis. I decided that I bought a bunch of this bamboo stuff, but I don't love it. So I was like, I just need to start weaving this off and figuring out if I could find, I don't know, a voice for it, I guess. So this is going to be my background. It's pretty thin. So, and the reason why it's pretty thin is because most of these are actually pretty thick. So that way I can thread this on at 12.5 EPI, and then it will sort of be like a mesh almost. It's going to hold my thicker yarns. And I think that's it. And I'm not going to weigh this right. I pretty much know that I have enough here to
Oh
do
yeah,
it.
there's loads there.
That's a lot.
You think?
But what weight-ish is it? Like an 8.2 or
No.
a
Oh,
lace weight or?
it's bamboo 7. I feel like it's very, this stuff's weird. It's almost like it's the exact same texture as like embroidery floss, you know? So
Oh
it's
yeah, so a
it's a strand.
6-strand cotton.
Yeah, it's like a 6-strand cotton. I think its closest equivalent might be the like a mercerized
Mhm.
5 two.
Yeah.
But definitely weaves a little tighter at 15 EPI, probably better at because it's not going to glue or shrink or anything. But I think I've done it at 15 EPI and it's worked out pretty well. So this is just going to be a little bit loose. It would be a very weft-based weave if I tried to weave it at 12.5, I think, without different textures and weight. So I think that's it. Um,
If you needed the specific specs for it, embroidery floss is on the master yarn chart. So
oh,
it's got yardage and blah blah blah. So as long as that's close to embroidery floss, then you could get a pretty good approximate yards per pound, meters per kilogram set, that kind of thing. For anybody who happens to have embroidery floss or something like it in their stash. Carly's already got a plan, doesn't need that information necessarily, but if you've got something like that, that's a place you could go to get some information.
and I know that this is like I could go to Silk City Fibers or to Cotton Clouds and get the all the information I need for this. It's not on the spool or on this cone, but it's a it's like bamboo BAMBU 7. It's
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
brand.
Bamboo 7 I think is also on the
Yeah,
chart, but like you said, you can get the information from the supplier's website.
yeah.
Okay.
So that's it. I'm just going to be going through here, just looking at what I have. And oh, the other reason why I'm doing this way too is because when I mix fibers, I find that if you sandwich your wools in between like two cellulose fibers, like things that will want to felt, things that won't want to felt, if you kind of isolate your warp ends, it's not going to grab the other fibers around it so much. So it might shrink in its own little universe, but it's not going to bring its neighbors with it.
Right.
So I'm trying to just sort of isolate the different fibers. So yeah, we'll see if that works.
Well,
But
and
that's
also alternating things across the warp will distribute their properties rather than concentrating their properties. So you'll have less of this sort of wacky stuff that can happen when you've got a real mixture of yarns, as we talked about in working with stash yarns. And Mom has just pointed out in the chat that according to the Master Yarn Chart, Bamboo 7 is 2,100 yards per pound, which is exactly the same as 5/2 cotton. So good guess there. So what can you just tell us a few of the things you're pulling out of your jar there so that
I'm just trying to remember what they are. So this is cotton. It's like a very thin cotton. I probably won't use it. This one's the same weight as, it's really pretty. I hand dyed it.
yeah.
This is also like a rayon. So right now I'm mostly just trying to figure out which ones I'm most interested in. I'm probably gonna avoid things like this. It's 100% wool, so I could dye this, or use it for like a small felting project or quilting frog. So that kind of has its own place. And it's all over the place here. So I'm just gonna throw this on the ground. I'm probably gonna try to focus on these little bits because it'll be a really good way of getting through with all these. This is also wool. So, and I do like blue. This is a superwash wool in yellow.
Are those mostly knitting yarns you've got in there?
Yeah, they're almost all knitting yarns or things that I've spun. There's a few hand spun things, but a lot of these I order my wool from Wool to Die For in bulk. Like this is a lace weight superwash merino and then dye them. So this is one where the it just tangled up so much I couldn't unskein it, so I just stuck it in here. So I might pull a few strands out of this because I should be able to get a few yards before it tangles up again.
Yeah, yeah.
But it will be a nightmare if I want to use it. So I'll put this in the pile.
Yeah, I think I have several nightmares in my pile over here, but we'll just let me see. Okay, so you're gonna, oh, so that one's got a little texture. Is that a hand spun?
This one's hand spun, hand dyed, and it's tencel and merino wool.
Beautiful.
So it's really little treasure. So they need like it. But yeah, I don't know. Everyone has a story. I'm like, oh, I remember when I got this. And
Yeah, and
but
it's fun to be able to use up those little bits and put them into something.
yeah, yeah, it's really fun. But
Okay, so I'm gonna switch to my pile and start talking about what I've got. And then I don't start making some decisions, I guess. Okay, so I hope folks. Carly's going to be busy looking at her yarns, so maybe the folks who are watching can help me make some choices because you see if I switch to my uh, tabletop camera, I pulled out from my stash. I I started out just kind of looking for anything that had some pretty color. And let me see if I can fix the exposure here a little bit. The camera that points down at the surface of the table does not have very good color or exposure, but that's pretty good. So I went through my stash. I was looking for things that I had. Originally, I was thinking I don't want to do cotton again because I just did cotton the last time, but I don't have much of anything else on bobbins. So I pulled out some bobbins that were textures I hadn't used before, like chenille and a few other odds and ends. And then I started going for some of the knitting yarns that I have because most of the balls of knitting yarns are partial. They're not complete. Let's see, I'll put the spotlight back on. Oop, there we go. Thanks. So they're part of a ball. I don't know how far that's going to go. And yeah, I have lots of these little bits and pieces. And then sometimes I have things like this yarn, which I think is quite pretty. And I've got a whole package of like a pound of this, but none of the balls have any information on them. I don't know what the fiber content is. I don't know what the yardage is. So, oops. As I started hauling stuff out, I started out with some teals and multicolored stuff. And then I think I picked out this one and realized I had a bunch of pinks and decided that the pinks and the golds were kind of nice together. And then I found this one and it's more of a peach than pink. And it doesn't really, like those two, not going to put those together. And I don't even really like, I don't like those together. So I wound up just hauling out anything that I thought would either go with this thing or with this thing. And yellows and golds and creams and whites. And then I figured I would decide which color family I was going to go with once I got it all up at the table. So I have a fair bit of this stuff. Well, here, let me pull up. Here's a white. Oops. And it's this Helena stuff. And I have also the same thing in a kind of creamy, a light goldy color. And then I have it in a real yellow color, which is probably going to be too yellow. And I have it in a real pinky color, which on my camera here looks like it's just sort of a pretty soft pink, but it's actually quite saturated. So it's a bummer that the color isn't turning out well. So this one, it doesn't really, I don't know. Anyway, it's in the mix. Because I haven't yet decided if I'm actually going to put any of the multicolor stuff in, or if I'm just going to choose from some solids and different textures. And I also have stuff like, oh, let's see. Oops, that's hooked. Stuff like this, which will be, this one is going to be more problematic on the loom because it's very thick and thin, and I should test and see if it's going to, if I can find an end, test and see if it's going to even be strong enough. Abrasion could certainly be an issue with this one, so if I'm going to use it, then I need to make sure not to crowd it in the reed. Where's an end so I can see how strong it is? Should be somewhere near an end here. Good heavens, there we go. All right, so if I hold a few strands of it together, because you never just pull on one warp thread at a time. Oh, that's strong. Okay, so I don't need to worry about, yeah, I don't need to worry about breakage, at least. That's good news. So just with this one, it'll just be abrasion. And you know, here's a different cotton that's more of a natural color. It's got a lot of texture too, but it's not as thick and thin, and it doesn't have the sort of unspun slubby bits. It's more of a boucle, but it's not boucle either. I don't know. I've got this stuff. It's like it's a tube, and it's pretty stretchy, but once it is stretched out, then it can't keep stretching. So it's got a little bit of a spring, but I think once it was under tension, it wouldn't be too much of a problem. And I kind of like this gold. This stuff had made me start thinking of sort of a rose gold kind of colorway. So like, I don't know, these sorts of colors together. One thing I did want to do, or I had in mind when I was pulling stuff out of the stash, was that the last scarf that I did for the sample was a wide variety of hues, and they were all pretty saturated. This time I wanted to go with a narrower family of colors. So, you know, staying in that sort of pinks, golds, and some kind of natural or white. So I do have up in here some fine things, like this is, I'm pretty sure this is tencel, 8-2 tencel, but it's awfully skinny, and I think it will be, I think there's so much going on here already with texture and color that I don't need to complicate my life even further by having really heavy or really fine stuff. So here's another one. This is an 8-4 cotton. It's more in the same, a similar weight. I mean, it's finer than these others, certainly, but it's not as much finer as an 8-2. Looks like I pulled this one out. I've got several spools of this, and there's this little bit to use, or you know, end of this one spool, but this is a wool. It's not 100% wool, but it's a wool blend. So I'm gonna I probably won't use it because of this stretch factor and the fact that it's going to work differently than the others if I put it in a stripe by itself. Unless I decided I wanted to do what Carly's doing and alternate wool with not wool all the way across. But that has not been, that's not kind of where my head is going. One thing I want to do this time is to pick some stuff that's going to be more stretchy or less stretchy, and certainly more textured or less textured, so that as I work through my project on the loom, you get to see what happens when things stretch differently, or when they have to be treated somehow specially to work well. And another thing is that I have no idea what the yards per pound is of this thing, so I don't have a way of estimating what the yardage is. I could measure it if I wanted to. I could put it on a warping board and measure how many yards I've got. But my plan, rather than working out all the numbers carefully the way that I did with the sample scarf and explain in the class, I'm more just gonna kind of wing it I'll plan what order I want, which yarns I'm going to use, what order I'm going to use them in, what I'm going to do if I happen to run short before I get to the width of the scarf that I want. And then I will wind a folded warp to make sure that whatever I come up with is symmetrical. So that is my plan. If anybody out there has like any questions about any of these yarns on my pile, or a suggestion for, hey, you should definitely use this one or definitely not use that one, shout out. And in the meantime, I'm just going to sort of go through here and take out anything that's really skinny, like that guy, really skinny, put him aside. And that's skinny as well. That's 8210 cell. It would work maybe for weft, but I'm not going to include it in the warp. And this one is, that one's mostly acrylic. I pulled it out because I thought maybe the colors would work well with this one, and I don't hate it on the screen, but I don't love them together in person. This is more brown or something more orange. I don't know. So anyway, it's acrylic. I'm going to throw it out now too, and just keep sort of playing around with sorting this stuff out. So if you have any comments or input, please share them. Otherwise, there's some questions in the chat for Carly.
But yeah.
Sandy would like to know what the multicolored dark and light, super thick and thin yarn was, and I will unspotlight so you can.
Let's see. Oh, was it this one?
I don't know. That doesn't look like it's a thick and thin, but maybe it appeared to be before.
From back here, maybe? Because this one is.
It looks like the multicolored dark and light.
Yeah, this
super
one
thick yarn.
is. I'm trying to think if there's any other.
That is the one that she meant, yes.
Okay, awesome. So this is a weird yarn. This was definitely an experimental line that Lion Brand did. It is wool, which is awesome. It's meant for making socks. It's meant to be self-striping yarn. So it's actually,
Oh,
and then you
like a
knit it
knitted blanket.
here. Yeah. And then, so the idea is that, if you
Oh,
make
yeah.
socks out of it, it will self-stripe on its own. So I just had it and I just have no idea what to do with it. So this might be a good way of using it because I don't knit socks. I tried.
How long is are the color things, and how long are you planning on making your warp?
That's a really good question. At first I was like, oh, I'm just gonna make it scarf length, but I think I'm gonna actually do the full loom width, which
Right.
is it'll end up being about 12 inches wide. And if I do like a 4-yard warp, then I can actually have enough stuff to like make a tunic. Like I'm not just stuck with like this is a shawl and this is all it's gonna be. Like I can make a cocoon coat, I could just make yardage. Or I could stop weaving early if I want, or I could make 2 shawls and then give them away. After you've been weaving for a while, it's like I feel like I need another shawl. Like, not at all. I have so many. So I'm trying to think about alternative uses for this because I could also just work all in cotton, like maybe get rid of this idea and do the same thing with like these cottons. I have a lot of these thin cottons. These are all the same kind of yarns. And then I can make dish towels maybe if I wanted to do something like that using this concept, maybe using this one as the background, maybe using something like this with the weft and then putting in little pink and green stripes maybe. So I could go that way and use up this little chunk of cottons over here. I don't know. But, or I could stick with this. There's a lot of really cool stuff. Like I love, this is chenille. I like maybe anchoring these 2 colors, to highlight, go against the dark, might be really cool.
That
And
might
then,
be really nice. Yeah.
yeah, I like it. And then sort of, so this would be kind of like what I'm basing the whole thing around.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if there's quite, yeah, there'd be enough in here. There's just, it's like, like not tan, but Jen, it's like working with her floor loom. It's almost like baking where you have to have these precise things. I feel like I'm just like, oh, dash of this. Add a little bit more of that. Maybe not
Oh,
more.
it's going to be very dash of this, dash of that, not making, oh, in my world this time. When I do stash stuff, and in fact, it used to be almost all the weaving I did was just totally unplanned. I would take a ball like this. I would decide my warp is going to be 3 yards long, and I would wind this 3 yards long and then count how many ends I had and put that on a piece of paper somewhere. And once I had enough ends to be the width of the thing I wanted, then I would decide how to distribute all those little individual chains across the width.
Mhm.
But that method works much better front to back than it does back to front. So when I switched dressing my loom, when I switched to dressing my loom back to front after about 10 years of weaving, I stopped doing that. Um, and sometimes I miss it, but back to front is just so much more efficient and easier and stress-free for me that I have stuck with it, even though that means I don't get to do this sort of completely unplanned. Um, I used to call them serendipity warps. Uh, yeah, I haven't done them in decades. I guess I could do that this time around, but I want to do a folded warp, so not gonna.
I feel I should represent all the people who are inveterate planners and just say that all these ideas make me feel very anxious.
Well, and that is why I included in the course how to do all the planning, how to measure all this stuff, and add up. So how to use your stash yarn amounts worksheet. I don't know, this got turned around somehow. There we go. Your stash yarn amounts worksheet to calculate exactly how much you have, and do you have enough ends, and will you get to where you're aiming for, and you're not just gonna wing it.
Yep.
Because the ones who are, I think the folks who are more comfortable winging it don't need as much reassurance that it's going to work out. But if you need that reassurance, I want you to have the tools to be able to get it. So,
I think one of the good things about the recipe that you made, Janet, is that there's not a lot of color interlacement happening. So, like you were holding up two colors, being like, I don't know if I like these colors together,
yeah,
but you're not worried about how they're going to blend.
right. They're not going to cross each other.
Right.
Yeah, if you take two colors where you're like, I don't like these colors together at all, they look terrible. But once you interlace them, they create this other color, which is amazing.
Right. And uh, often even if you have a couple of colors like these maybe that you don't so much love, as soon as they're assembled into a whole, it looks intentional, especially if the balance of the piece is sort of carefully thought through. And by carefully, I mean either it's symmetrical because you did a folded warp, or you do that sort of serendipity thing I was talking about originally or a few minutes ago. And in that case, I take my little skinny warp chain and say, okay, I'm going to put a few ends of this one here and a few ends of that one there. And if I decide that looks unbalanced to me, I can pull all those ends right back out and stick them someplace else that looks more attractive. But anyway, once you put things together, I've lost track of which direction is closer to my camera. There you go. They look like you meant to put them together. They're less, they usually look pretty intentional, even if at this stage you're not entirely sure you love them. And they're also going to get modified by whatever weft crosses them both, and the weft will be a unifying factor. So if I took these two and I crossed them both with
Dark
the,
brown or black.
yeah, which I actually have some of over here, suddenly that works better. I actually like that.
Yeah, that's nice.
But again, this colored is not showing up on the screen as accurately as it does here. Let's see if I switch back to my other camera, if you can see it. Yeah, that's more like it. See,
Yeah.
it's orangey. It's actually a little bit more rust. I don't know. I can't even make words about what color it is. But again, here on the camera, they look like they go together better than they do in my eyes. So maybe I just need to, maybe it's my eyes that are broken and the cameras are okay. I don't know. All right.
There are a couple questions coming in.
Okay.
Um, Cass says for anyone, especially Carly, she has 40 skeins of Luet linen, bulky and chunky. It's about 109 yards per 100 grams, but it's very thin and thick. It's discontinued. What set would you use it at? It's in her stash.
Ooh, that's a hard one because the thick yarns kind of
Thick and thin is so hard.
it is. I've used it, let's see. I think for warp, I would focus on trying to get at least enough width that the thick parts don't get flipped up in your heddles. So like prioritize what you are able to weave. Or like you don't want to go so thin that your thick parts end up shredding. So I would actually got a dog that's coming in. Come on, buddy. Oh, he
What
fell.
about using it as weft? I wonder if that
Yeah,
might be better.
using it as weft.
Though, if you put something really textured in your weft, it's going to obscure all of your warp, right? If you have a couple of textured warp stripes and then you use a whatever you use for weft, if that's smooth and you have other smooth warp stripes, then you're going to have areas where the texture isn't just overtaking everything
Mm.
else. If you put a lot of texture in your weft, then it's everywhere. So it's not a bad choice. It's just that's one, you know, implication of making that choice.
Yeah. I definitely would not do like a fancy double heddle
Mm.
with it. I would definitely keep it with one heddle, plain weave. I've had really good luck too doing like, a simple warp and then doing the textured weft pick by pick with a simple weft. And it sort of
Mhm.
sandwiches those thick and thins in between a background color. So you see it more. And then they end up kind of like if there's a strong color contrast. I'm thinking about this project I did. It was like a towel with hand spun cotton. So it was white hand spun cotton with navy on the warp and weft. And so what happened was the thick parts they ended up kind of creating a pattern because they were so strong, so they would sort of, it almost, I don't know, it was really cool. It's kind of like when you have color pooling, but it was like texture pooling. So you'd get these really light parts that would kind of fade into the darker warp. So I don't know. I think it's a fun way of using that. Or you just put it on your loom, maybe do a sample of it and see how you feel about making a full piece from it because that overall texture can be really cool too.
I see Mary Ellen is asking in the chat, what is a folded warp? Mary Ellen, briefly, it's when you have, so for example, I will probably make my scarf warp 3 yards long. But in order to make the two sides exactly symmetrical, the left half and the right half of my warp exactly symmetrical, rather than wind the whole thing 3 yards long, I'm going to wind it twice as long, 6 yards, and then fold the length. I can't do it with my hands. Fold the length in half so that the two sets of stripes will be side by side, and one end will have a loop until I cut it. And that way, once it's folded in half, it will be half the length, which was my original desired length, 3 yards. Let me start over. If I want it to be 3 yards, if I'm going to wind it folded, I make it twice as long, which is 6 yards. And then after I fold it, it's back to 3 yards, but the two halves will be identical. And that is described in somewhat more detail in the course, but the course also has links to a blog post and a toolbox that describe it in a lot more detail. And I'll be doing that in the Live at the Loom videos coming up, so you'll be able to see it in action.
Um, Sandy had a question for me, which was that she doesn't recall the name of my color wheel, rough, and to what extent do you give it consideration when stash weaving? So the color rule, I'm working on modifying this one because it turns out that there's more, well, unsurprisingly, there's more to color mixing than that. But that particular rule is the two primary rule and says pick stuff that falls between two primary colors on the color wheel, so within 1/3. I think at this point I'm still doing my experiments, but it's something closer to stay within 3 steps on the color wheel. So crossing the primaries is okay depending on the primary, but you want to stay close to each other on the color wheel. Having said that, um, when you're doing stash weaving, it depends, like everything else.
Hmm.
If you're blending all the colors together, then yes, you want to think about it, particularly if you want to retain bright colors. If you, in particular, if you've got, you want to think about your weft color. If you've got a lot of different colors in the warp, then uh, some of the weft colors are probably going to dull the warp colors and vice versa if you choose something that's not a neutral color. So for this project, I tend to like things that are dark and dull. So things like black or dark gray or brown, or, dark brown or something like that, because they tend not to change the color of the hue of the other colors much. They tend to intensify other colors, and they tend not to compete as much for attention. Having said that, there's no reason you can't use a brilliant blue or a brilliant some other brilliant color as weft. Just know that that's going to have a bigger impact on your warp and your warp colors, and it's also more likely to blend into duller colors if they're far apart on the color wheel from most of the things that you've got. The other thing to keep in mind is that depending on uh, what uh, is that depending on how much duller color you're getting, it may not affect the look of the final thing because the eye tends to look at saturated colors. So if some areas are um, blending into bright colors and others are blending into duller ones, your eye will tend to notice the bright areas and skip over the duller colors. So as long as there's not too many areas of duller colors, then you're still good. Okay, so that's my spiel.
So I don't know if you guys can see what I have here, but I have now um, weeded out several things. Well, first I sorted my things that I have done. I've sorted my whites and creams separately. So these are more like bleached whites over here with the pinks, and the creams and naturals are over here with the gold and this one. I've taken out several things, yellows that just didn't work, too bright, too yellow, too lemony, whatever. I've taken out a lot of stuff that was really skinny. This is a perfect color, but it's 10-2 cotton. There's this much of this 10-2 cotton. So I could potentially, like I could weigh it and see if there's enough on there to be weft, but I'm not going to put it in my warp because it's so skinny. And I took out the 5-2s even, but I left some things that were heavier, more like a 3-2 or a little heavier than that even. And so I reduced my options down to these kinds of bleached white, pink, and a little bit of purple, because if I do use this one, there's some purple in there, and I could put just an end or two here or there, but it's not quite the right purple. This is more of a lavender, and this is pretty saturated, whereas none of the rest of it is. So I'm unconvinced about this one, but I'm leaving it in the pile for now. And then the other stuff that I have are these coppers and golds, and it's got some sparkle. And then I've got this stuff, which I have 4 full of these little, let's see, this is Patton's Cotton DK. I've got 4 full balls of this, which means it could be a good sort of all over background that these other things stand out against. And in this pile over here, I have two of these. That's that Helena knitting yarn that's about a 3/2 weight. And I also have several of these that I can use to stretch out things. If I do go with this color combo, I will probably only choose one of these two because they're real similar but not the same. And I think probably one or the other will be better. So
Yeah.
does the peanut gallery out there have a preference between the pinks and the coppers?
My peanut gallery says put one of the pinks in with the coppers as kind of a zinger color. And go with the coppers and so that it's not all
Oh, ooh, like
possibly
that.
that one, possibly the lighter one. I would put them both into consideration, then see what you see in the design.
Mm,
I would want something with a little more value contrast and a little more opinionated.
exactly. And this is what I got for pinks, or
Yep.
when I had first, which is a little more. And I like that it's an interesting texture. This is a
Hmm.
cable of some kind. It's a little heavier.
Hmm.
Well, this one is quite heavy, um, but this one is finer. So this
The
would,
darker one will show up more because it has
yeah.
darker
And I
values.
like it a lot with I like it, again, I like it better on camera than I do in front of me. Um,
But you might also include that lighter one just so that you have design options if you decide that you want something a little lighter.
well, yeah, I'll measure them all.
Yep.
Um, okay. So we've gotten one vote for pink and one vote for copper in the chat. So that
Um,
and
Carol's asking for me.
I'm leaning towards this yarn. I like this yarn. So I'm going to go this direction with the addition of these pinks. Oops, pinks.
Carol is asking if you would consider doubling or tripling the 10-2 cotton.
I could, but and if I needed to stretch things out, then that I'd be more inclined to. But the finer yarn, well, I guess if I doubled it and treated it as a thicker thread, it wouldn't be as likely to have tension issues. But I have enough going on here with texture and stretch and things that uh, that is not where I want to put my risk, if you see what I mean, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So yes, I could, but I'm going to pick my poison in a different direction. I see there's something in the Q&A.
No, that was the question in the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to answer that.
Okay. So next thing I'm going to do with this little collection is to start measuring how much I have and make sure that I've got why does this keep flipping around? Using this sheet, make sure that I am confident I have enough. I'm not going to measure I'm first I'm going to measure how far I can go. How far I can go with one of these balls, because if I know I have enough for the entire warp with these, because I've got 4 of these, then I can just totally wing it with the rest of it. But I'd also kind of like to know about how many ends I can get out of each of these, in part because the information will be useful, but also because I want to demonstrate how to do that. So I'm going to switch to, let's see. First of all, let's do this one. This is the Patton's Cotton DK, and the ball information here says, let me get my glasses. Where are my glasses? Whoops, crash. Ball information says that it's got 116 yards, and it's 1.75 ounces in the ball. So if I have 116 yards, how many ends can I get out of that if I'm going to make my warp? And I'm going to do the folded warp, remember, so I'm going to figure out if it's, well, I'll figure it out for my 3-yard length, and then I know what I'm working with, whether it's folded or not. So I'm going to share my screen and go to the course, and I'm going to go to the warp ends and width calculators. So there are 3 different versions of this oops, sorry. I clicked on a vocabulary word instead of the title here. There are 3 different versions of this calculator. There's one for imperial measurements, if you like to work entirely in ounces, pounds, and yards. There's one for metric units, if you like to work entirely in grams and meters per kilogram. But I tend to like to weigh things in grams, but measure them in inches and yards. That's a particularly Canadian approach. But I do find that most of the information that's out there as far as, say, yards per pound, I know those numbers by heart in yards per pound. I don't know what they are in meters per kilogram. But grams are a more precise way to measure small weights. So I prefer to use my scale in grams. So use whichever of these work for you. But this ball band that I'm looking at, it has, it's got the imperial information. It says 116 yards and 1.1 3/4 ounces. So I want to show you a couple of things about the calculators. First of all, there's some information right here. If you already know how many yards are in the package, you don't need to do the calculation to figure out the number of yards, and yet the calculator doesn't let you just type in the number of yards that are available. So what you can do to trick it is to say, I have 1 pound, and that pound has, so my ball band here says it's got 116 yards. I'm just going to pretend that what I have here is 116 yards. There we go. Now my total yards available are 116. So you put in 1 pound and the number of yards actually on the thing. Or in the case of the metric one, you would put in, the assumption here is 1 kilogram. So you'd put in 1,000 grams and the number of meters actually on the ball. So this ball, for instance, has 113 meters. So I could put that in there, and you can see that the end result here is 113 meters available. So I'm going to go back here to the imperial. I've got 1 pound and 116 yards. That way the calculator is tricked into thinking I have 116 yards available. And then I'm going to make my warp length 3 yards. And it's telling me here that I should be able to get 38 or so ends out of it. But if I want to play it safe and not assume I'm going to be able to get all those ends because maybe the measurements aren't accurate, that's especially important if you're working with partial balls or you're not sure exactly what the weight of the packaging is, then this rounds down by either a percentage or a specific number of ends or the combination of the two. So if I say I want to have a 10% safety buffer, but I'm also going to subtract 2 ends, there you can see it just went down by 2 ends. If I go back to 0 ends, then the idea is that I can count on having 34 ends, or at least it's safer to count on having 34 ends rather than all these 38, nearly 39 ends. And then if I say here what set I would use this yarn at, and that's this Patton's one I was looking at, I'm just eyeballing that. I would say that's probably going to be good at 10 EPI, just based on the thickness and comparing it to other yarns that I'm familiar with. So if I put 10 in there, then it's telling me I can get 3.4 inches out of that. I have 4 of these balls, which means I could get 6.8, 12 I can get 13 inches out of those 4 balls if I math that right, which means I've got plenty with just this stuff to be my background And the rest of it is all sort of accent extra flavor. So I know I won't run short is my point. So I can then just sort of wing it for the rest of it. So I can figure out about how many ends I can get from the rest of it. So this stuff, for instance, I have this is a really pretty, it's that same Helena stuff, but it's just that last little bit, a really pretty gold shiny bit. And the shiny would be nice against the more matte Patton's cotton. So I'd like to know how many ends I could get from this. So in order to do that, I need to know, first of all, I have to weigh the whole thing. So I need to get out my scale, which I have right here. And I need to know the weight of this cardboard core, which is about 20 grams. And I need to know how many yards per pound this yarn is. So I'm going to weigh the thing in grams. So I'm going to go to this grams and yards version. The weight of the yarn on the package. So for that, I go to my scale. And, oops, oh, hit a thing. That is 31 grams. So if I put 31 grams in there, and I know that that cardboard core is approximately 20 grams. And if I didn't know that, I could either weigh an empty one, like so, or I could go to the toolbox, the Weaver's Toolbox, which has a list of weights, approximate weights of a lot of different kinds of packaging. And those weights are approximate, which is why that safety buffer is so important. So that means I have about 11 grams of the yarn. And now I need to know what the yards per pound is of that yarn. And I can figure that out because I have the ball band from a different ball that will let me work it out. So see down here, it says enter the yards per pound of the ball yarn or use the yards per pound from ball band calculator. That's a link that will take you to another one of our mini calculators already on the site. There we go, yards per pound. And this one it's got metric numbers on here on the ball band. So it says it's 50 grams, which equals 112 meters. So if I put in 50 grams and 112 meters, this tells me that that means this yarn is 2240 meters per kilogram or 1,111 yards per pound. So I can take that number, copy it, and put it back over here. Okay, so now I know that this little bit has got 26.9, we're estimating, yards on it. If I make my scarf warp 3 yards long, that means I should be able to get safely 8 ends of this stuff. Well, okay, so I can get, that would be 2 stripes of 4 ends, or it could be 4 stripes of 2 ends, or it could be 8 stripes of 1 end, or it could be, stripes that were uneven widths. But I know I can get about 8 ends of this. So I'm going to write on my worksheet, let's see, the Helena gold, the total weight, what did I say? It was 31 grams. The package weight was 20 grams. The weight of the yarn only, that's 11 grams. The yards per pound was 111. I got that from the calculator. The length of the yarn then is, scroll back up here. But you don't really need all these interim numbers once you get to the end, but you might as well write them down so that you don't have to calculate them repeatedly. Where is that? There it is. Yards of yarn available, so it's 26.9. Possible ends, well, 8.9 rounded up. 8.97 rounded up is 9, but safe ends, we said 8. And if I set that one at 10 EPI, then that means I would have approximately, the calculator will tell me, surprise, surprise, 8 divided by 10 is 0.8 inches. That's useful if I want to make sure that I have enough yarn to total whatever my total width is going to be. I already know that my plan is to fill in whatever I need with this stuff, so it's not that important for me to calculate the sort of running tally of the width. But if that's not your situation, then you can do that here on the sheet. All right, so I'm going to repeat that same process with several of these other ones to know how many ends I'm working with so that I have an idea of what my ratio of accent ends or stash ends, if we want to call them that, to this sort of all over background, which is going to be the dividers in between them, is. And also so I can decide, do I need both pinks? Should I use the light pink? Should I use the darker pink, etc.? So that is what I'm going to do with the rest of my balls to make a decision about what yarns are going in. Does anybody have any questions about that?
I think I have a question.
Okay.
When you are doing a stash project, are you thinking about what you can design with what you have, or do you have a goal of like getting through like the full ball or the full space? You don't have little extras. Like, is it about getting through it, or are you designing like, are you thinking about design over?
It depends on how much of a thing there is. When there's just a little bit, I will plan to use it all. If there's a whole ball, then no, I'm not going to probably use all of that because I don't want this to overwhelm everything else. So I'll just probably decide, will I put in one stripe? Will I put in two stripes? What's the maximum width I'm going to let myself have out of that stripe? That kind of thing. And then if I start winding, if I say, okay, I'm going to do one stripe and I'd like it to be half an inch. And then I'm winding along and I realize that I've got my half an inch and there's hardly any left. Well, I'll probably just keep going and use it up because what am I going to do with that little bit of leftovers except save it for in case I have a broken warp end. But
Hey, that's important.
yeah, right. But chances are, especially if I'm doing a folded warp, so my warp is extra long, I'm not going to be able to, I need to have 6 yards to get from one end of the warp to the other. And chances are that it's not going to run out exactly at the peg. So I'll probably have something like 3 yards or 2 yards or even 2 feet left over after I cut off at the peg. So I'll have that little bit to fix breaks with if I need to. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
When I did the sample scarf with all those little stripes, I was literally working from those leftover bobbins and little bits of spool ends that you see in that picture. And I used up every bit of each one because there was only enough sometimes for 2 ends or 3 ends. None of my stripes were any wider than 13 or 14 ends, I think. But these are much larger balls. They'd go a lot farther. Whoops.
So we're just about out of time, but there are a few questions. 2 questions, actually.
Mhm.
Mary Wood wants to know if you will be using the draft editor to do the stripe planning for the warp.
Yes, probably, maybe, yes. Well, I'm going to demonstrate how you might do it. Whether I use that plan for my scarf or not, I'm not sure, but I will demonstrate how you can do it.
Okay. And then Cass wants to know, maybe you, maybe Carly, would you comment on big box yarns you use that you would recommend?
What's it like? What are big box yarns?
Yeah, I
Like
don't know what that means.
yarns from like big box stores?
That would be my guess. Maybe Cass can clarify.
Let's see. And what's the question again? Because I'm wondering what big box.
She says from Joanne, Michael's, Walmart, yarns from those places.
Yeah, well, first, Joann's is no more, which is pretty shocking. So they're going to be gone by the end of April, I think. Um, I don't know how to answer this question. I think I've sort of just found a brand that I really liked. Like when in the beginning, when I was experimenting, I didn't want to spend a ton of money on, really nice wools and stuff when I was still just trying to figure out how the loom works. So I'm a huge, supporter of using what you can afford and what is accessible to you, no matter what it is. I know people can get kind of heated about that, but um, I really, really, really liked things I got from for a while I ordered everything exclusively from Lion Brand just because I kind of learned their number system. There's all these different ways of talking about the weights of the yarn. Like it's helpful to know how many yards per 100 grams is, and how that works with your EPI. And after you learn those numbers, after you're like, okay, it's like 150 yards per 100 grams, it's usually going to be a 7 or 8 EPI heddle, maybe a 5 possibly, So after a while, you kind of get used to those patterns. But I kind of got used to what they would consider, worsted weight or number 4 weight versus a number 3 weight. So having some consistency with a single brand, especially as these big box stores are starting to sort of flounder and disappear, will help you order things online, I think. There'll just be fewer surprises because you get used to how they shoot their yarns and how their quality generally is. But yeah, I don't know. I hope that answers your question. There's a lot of good surprises in those box stores. I feel like sometimes I'll be like, wait, this is amazing. It's like,
Rose wants to know what about the difference between twist, stretch, etc. once washed. I think that's a question for Janet.
Yeah, that is something. If you go through the working with stash yarns course, you could see there's several different tests that you can do to see if things are going to be strong enough, whether they're going to abrade in the reed, and then you can also like measure out a known length. 5 yards is a good option, and make little butterflies out of them, and then wash those like you think you will wash the finished piece, and then undo the little butterflies and measure them again and see how much length you lost. And if you can't get the little butterflies apart, then you know that washing it that way is going to either felt or somehow, affect the fabric to the point that it will be pretty much meshed together. So if that's not your goal, then you need to wet finish it in a different way. Or if you're okay with it, well, then that's your end result. But you're probably going to get, if some of your yarns do that and other yarns don't, then you need to sort of estimate in some way what the difference in the behavior will lead to. With these ones that I am working with, like this guy, this one is another one of those thick and thins, but it doesn't have, it has thick areas and it has thin areas, but it doesn't have huge areas and tiny areas. So the average is pretty much even down. Plus the thicks are not too close together, which means when I put several of them side by side, chances are a thick from one will line up with a thin from another. It's more likely that all the thicks wind up in the same blop. A butterfly. To make a butterfly, you let's see. No, where's my camera? I hold the yarn between 2 fingers and then make a figure 8 around my pinky and my thumb, and then I would cut this. So if I have, say, measured off 5 meters, I've got a loose end here, and I then take this end that was between my fingers and secure it around the middle, and that little thingy is a butterfly. And then I would put this in the sink with hot water and soap and agitation, or whatever I was planning on doing for the for a loosely woven stash scarf. Hot water and agitation is probably not how I would wet finish it normally. So I might hand wash in cool water with whatever gentle soap or detergent you like to use. But the idea is that you would wet finish the little butterfly in a similar fashion to how you will wet finish the final fabric, and then see what the impact is of it. And another thing that you can do if all you care about is relative shrinkage between, say, this yarn and that other yarn, is to measure out equal lengths of all of them, tie them together at one end, and then tie them together at the other end so that they're all the same length, and then wet finish or wash all of them in the sink, and then once it's dry, see if one of them has become much shorter than the ones that it's tied to. So if one is now tight and the other one sag, you know there's going to be some differential shrinkage. So I had been talking about measuring stretch and things. These are not, none of these ones that I have here are particularly stretchy, with the exception of this one, which I mentioned. This is that tube. It's a knit tube, I'm sure. So there's a little bit of stretch, but then it hits like once I stretch it a little bit, it won't stretch any further. So I don't think it's going to be a problem. But as I was sort of sorting through things, I was verifying whether I thought they were going to play well together, partly by making sure to choose things that were all cotton or mostly cotton, with just a few exceptions. That's an exception. That one's not cotton. This one has, I'm sure, got cotton in it. It's probably got something else in there as well, maybe some viscose. But all these other ones are, that one's a cotton rayon blend, pretty sure. Yes, here, look. 52.3% cotton, 47.7% rayon. So I have avoided, at least hopefully, too much issue with stretch and that kind of stuff by sticking within a fairly narrow fiber family.
Janet, did you already answer Sigrid's question about what butterflies are?
Yeah.
Okay. We're at 108. So is there more that you wanted to cover today, or?
I don't have more. I'm just going to continue my process of measuring what I have to sort of estimate how far things are going to go, so that when I get to next week, when it's kind of planning out my warp stripes, with or without the draft editor, I know what my possible warp or stripe widths are. And Carly, what decisions have you made about?
So I have like a couple different options. I was looking at doing something with like the pinks, which also you can tell, same thing. It's a little muted with the camera, or doing something that's more light. So I'd be using those, which I like, but I love this green. It's so pretty. So what I'm doing is I'm just unscreening it. I'm gonna see how much of it I have. And I'm thinking about having this brown with this green be the constant. Like maybe I could even work these together. So then
Is that the one that was really tangly?
Yeah. So it's a mess. So I'm just slowly just hand rolling it and seeing how much of it I can untangle before I give up. But it's actually, the more I untangle it, the easier it's getting. So I think there's some hope for it.
Well, and even if you had to, like, if you wound off some and then had to cut it and work with it, and then you'd wind up with bits and bobbins, they would just be smaller bits than your current.
Oh,
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, it just takes some patience. And then I don't know if anybody else does this, but sometimes with these tangled skeins, like after a while, it's just, I can't stop playing with them. It's like, I just get something. It's like, no, I'm so close. Just a few more yards. I could keep going. And then, oh, look, I ended up losing. There's another little one. Oops, I threw it. So yeah, it's time to address this issue, I think.
Untangling skeins was my first fiber craft. And then I'd throw all the balls and skeins back into the drawer so they'd get tangled up again, and I could play with them another time.
I know, and you think you'd learn, and then you just don't. And then my dog gets into them. But I found some that I know I'm never going to use, so I was like, I'll just retire these and let him. He likes to pull the balls apart, which is really cute.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for us before we sign off for this week?
Not seeing any.
Okay, great. We will be back next week. We're going to be at the warp planning stage. So we will have finalized our yarn choices and have measured things to the extent that we plan to. Carly's doing more of a winging it thing. I'm going to make some more measurements just so that you have that demo, even if I don't wind up needing that much precision. And we'll go through planning out where things are going to land in our warps, insofar as we plan to plan, if that makes sense. All right. And then, so actually, in just an hour,
An hour. Yeah.
we have design
45
sessions
minutes.
with Tien. And next week, immediately following Live at the Loom, we'll have the live lecture for the Stash Weave Along. So we've got a couple of events back to back on these weekends.
All right.
Right.
Off we go.
Off we go. Bye, Carly. Bye, Tien. Bye, everybody.